Today, we're going to look at 3 places you can't go and people who went there anyways. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to do all of the like button's laundry, but only dry their clothes about 80% of the way. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. From 1995 to 2000, Terry Grove was the manager at the Animal Research Lab at Regions Hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota. During that time, she noticed there was an issue with a particular piece of large cleaning equipment that she and the other lab technicians used every single day. She voiced her concerns to the hospital and said that they needed to replace it ASAP because it was a disaster waiting to happen. But the hospital decided they didn't want to replace it, they wanted to fix it because they figured it was salvageable and it was more cost effective this way. But after the repairs, Terry and her team reported having the same issue with this piece of machinery. And so again, the hospital decided to fix it instead of replace it, and again, after the repairs, Terry and her team said the issue persisted. For years, Terry complained to the hospital that there were big issues with the design of this piece of equipment, that no matter how many times you try to fix it, it's always going to have this core issue, which is why it needs to be replaced. But the hospital was unwilling to spend the additional money required to replace this piece of machinery, and so eventually Terry and the rest of her crew just had to accept that they had a faulty piece of equipment and they had to be extra cautious every time they used it. In 2004, a few years after Terry had left the hospital, a 31-year-old woman named Tracy Kraling got a job there as a veterinary technician in the same lab that Terry had worked in. Tracy was devoted to animals, and she was a die-hard soccer and hockey player and fan. And in October of that year, she married the love of her life. Less than a month after her wedding day, she was in the lab finishing up for the day, and she needed to sterilize her equipment. And so she walked over to the still faulty piece of cleaning equipment called the autoclave. An autoclave is a device that looks kind of like an oven that uses superheated steam to sterilize equipment and other objects inside of it. The autoclave at Regions Hospital was a huge industrial version that staff would have to walk inside of to place their equipment and then walk out of before they started it. And the persisting issue with this autoclave was its door. It shut on its own. Once it shut, the suction that was created inside of it held the door shut. And so if you were unlucky enough to be stuck inside the autoclave, even if it was off, you couldn't open the door again. The suction was too strong, and so somebody outside the autoclave would be the only way for you to get out. The issue with this door was so bad that workers in the lab would prop the door open with a big piece of wood every time they went inside in order to guarantee it did not shut on them while they were inside. However, on this day, Tracy did not use a big piece of wood. Perhaps she thought she would only be inside for a couple of seconds, but either way, when she walked inside of that autoclave, the door shut behind her and then suction kicked in and she couldn't open it again. She was trapped. And then her worst nightmare came true when the machine turned on and the steam cycle slowly began to pick up. Unfortunately, none of her coworkers had seen her go into the autoclave, and so nobody knew she was stuck, and so nobody was there to open the door and let her out. And no matter how loud Tracy banged on that door and screamed and yelled, nobody would have heard her. And so eventually this superheated steam began being pumped into this room all over Tracy. Eventually, when her coworkers found her, she was still alive, but she died within 24 hours as a direct result of her steam burns. The hospital was ultimately fined $75,000 for their role in her death.
If you've been injured in an accident of any kind where it wasn't your fault, you need to check out this app. This is going to help you determine if you qualify for money in less than 1 minute, and it won't cost you a penny. If you were not at fault, click below and connect with an experienced personal injury attorney for a fast, free case evaluation.
$78 on these pants. The outfit I have on right now, it's already worth more than the entire box.
30 bucks at a store, 25 bucks a piece, 20 bucks, 40 bucks, and that's just being conservative. $150 worth of clothes.
Red Beast is a men's clothing subscription company that sends the latest streetwear to your house every single month.
Ooh, and this box got weight to it, meaning there's a lot of clothes in there. Let's go check it out.
I've needed a wallet for the longest time.
If you take a trip to Hawaii, there's a good chance you'll visit the beautiful Rainbow Falls on the eastern side of the Big Island. But if you travel less than a mile upstream of those falls, you'll find an equally beautiful attraction that far less people know about, and it's called the Boiling Pots. 10,000 years ago, after a volcanic eruption, lava was flowing down the side of the mountain when it entered the Wailuku River. As the lava gradually cooled, the river water flowing all around it wound up carving out these standalone pools of water that were connected by a series of small waterfalls. These pools collectively make up the boiling pots, and they get their name because periodically the water in these pools appears to be boiling. Tourists at the boiling pots are allowed to look at the water from a safe distance on the cement overlook, but under no circumstances are allowed to actually enter the water. In 2015, Jolie Ricewig was a 62-year-old woman living in Kona, Hawaii, which is on the western side of the island. There, she owned a bed and breakfast whose main allure was that guests at this bed and breakfast got to go on these fun adventure tours with Jolie all over the island. And they almost always involved paddleboarding or swimming because Jolie was an avid outdoors person and a very talented swimmer and swim instructor, and so felt comfortable leading these types of excursions. On September 14th of that year, Jolie brought one of her male guests from her bed and breakfast out for an adventure tour at the Boiling Pots. She would have known that it was an off-limits area for swimmers because there were signs up everywhere saying as much, but Jolie wasn't planning to swim in the boiling pots. Instead, she was planning to float on them on inflatable rafts. And so she and this man climbed aboard their respective rafts and began paddling around one of the upper pools, taking in the incredible view of this natural phenomenon. As they were relaxing, suddenly there was this rush of water that came tumbling over the fall that dumped down into the pool they were in. It was a flash flood. And before Jolie and this man could swim outside of the pool and get to safety, the water under them began to churn violently and actually thrust them over the edge down into the next pool. And as soon as they hit the water, they had fallen off of their rafts. Now they're swimming in the water, and they're feeling a current pulling them down and pulling them forward towards the next lip into the next pool. And so they both began desperately swimming towards the edge. Jolie actually grabbed the man and helped push him up and out to safety. And as soon as he was on land, he turned around to grab her, but she wasn't there. And so he's looking around and all he can see is her raft floating on the surface being taken down into the rapids. And so he thinks, okay, she must have fallen into the next pool. And so on the side of the waterway, he runs down and he's looking into the next pool, the next pool, the next pool, and she's nowhere to be found. And after a few minutes of looking and not knowing where she was, he called the authorities. They came out and they launched this huge search for her, but despite searching the entirety of the boiling pots and all the way downstream, there was no sign of her. And after looking for an entire week, they never found anything. It was like she just disappeared, and so they turned the search off. As devastating as this was for the family to not have closure about what happened to Jolie, this was not a surprising outcome. In fact, it was almost an expected outcome considering why the boiling pots are off limits to swimmers. Each of the pools of water that make up the boiling pots is a deep, nearly vertical shaft of water, and at the bottom of it are these entrances to these underground tunnels. And these entrances are big enough for a person to slip inside of. And these tunnels are not short. They go on for a long ways in all different directions. In a flash flood scenario, that increased water that's flowing down the boiling pots creates this unbelievable current that inside of each of these pools is pulling straight down, which gives the water the impression that it's boiling, because basically the water's tumbling over as it's being filtered up and down inside of this vertical shaft. And so if you get grabbed by this current, it's going to pull you down and into one of these tunnels, and you won't get out again unless the current releases you. And so Jolie, after helping her guest get out of the water to safety, she was pulled down and into one of these tunnels, and she was held there for 5 months until finally the current released her and her remains were spotted just below the pots in a tide pool. Lawrence Daquan Davis, who just went by Day, graduated from a military-style high school in 2009. Following his graduation, he enrolled in Job Corps, which offers young people from a low-income background free career education and vocational training. During his time in the Job Corps program, he trained as a medical assistant, and then after successful completion of Job Corps, he applied for numerous jobs all over the place, but no medical facility was ready to hire him. For a couple of years, Day consistently tried to apply to medical facility after medical facility, but after everybody kept denying him, mostly because he lacked experience or he lacked the credentials they were looking for, he eventually realized that, it's probably not going to happen, that he should look into some other career field. And so he decided he would join the military. But when he took the military entrance exam, he failed the math portion, and so was told he can't join the military. And so Day decided he would study and retake the exam, but he knew in the meantime he needed to make money right now. He was the oldest of 4 siblings, and his mother, who had him when she was only 14 years old, was out of work, and Day's father was not in the picture. And so Day felt like it was his responsibility to step up and help support his family. And so he did what many other people in Jacksonville, Florida did when they were struggling to find work. He went to a temp agency. Temp agencies are staffing firms that contract with employers who are in need of temporary, part-time, or seasonal workers. The temp agency hires someone like Day and then ships them off to one of their client companies when they need work. Conceptually, this employment structure works great for all parties involved. People like Day get to have a paycheck really quickly, and the companies have their short-term employment needs met on the cheap. But there's a loophole. Temp workers are legally employed by the temp agency, not by the physical location they go to do work, known as the direct employer. This is a very important distinction because it means the temp agency is the one that has to pay for insurance for the temp worker, not the direct employer. Therefore, if a temp worker gets hurt on a temporary job, the direct employer's insurance costs will not spike. Instead, the temp agency's insurance costs will spike. Meaning the direct employer knows they can be kind of reckless with their temporary workers because there's not a big penalty if they get hurt on the job. This loophole doesn't mean much if the temporary worker is being asked to be a receptionist where it's totally safe. But this loophole matters a lot when the temp worker is asked to do something dangerous, like work with industrial machinery inside of a factory. On August 16, 2012, Day received a call back from the temp agency he went to, telling him that they had a job for him. It was at the Bacardi Bottling Corporation in Jacksonville, Florida. They told him he needed to be at the warehouse that day at 2:45 p.m. for training, and then at 3 p.m., 15 minutes later, he would start his first shift. After Day agreed to do this job and hung up with the temp agency, he excitedly called his mother to tell her that he had finally landed a real job. In fact, this would be the first job he had ever had, and so he was just very proud of himself. And his mother was very proud of him too. And so Day asked her, would you give me a ride to Walmart so I can pick up some things I need for work? I need a white shirt, I need khaki pants, I need these special industrial boots. And so his mom said, absolutely. She swung home, she picked him up. The pair went to Walmart, they picked out his whole outfit, and then from Walmart, his mother just drove him directly over to the Bacardi factory to begin his first day. Day went inside, and just a couple of minutes later, at 2:45 p.m., he was shown a very short safety video. That would be all the training he received. Day was brought into Bacardi to be a warehouse clerk, which basically meant he would do odd jobs around the factory that didn't require a lot of skill. And so after he watched this training video, he was told to head down to the bottling line to watch all of the bottles as they went by to make sure the labels were put on properly. Before he headed down to the floor, Day stopped in the bathroom and took a very proud selfie of himself to commemorate the start of his first shift at his first job ever. He sent the picture to his fiance, put the phone in his pocket, and then headed out the door down to his first workstation. There was a section of the factory that initially Day was not working in, where there were these huge machines called palletizers that took the finished bottles of rum and stacked them into what are called pallets so they could be shipped off to stores. These palletizers are 2-story pieces of heavy machinery where the top story is just catwalks where the palletizer operator can manipulate the machines, and then the first floor is where the rum actually comes into the machine and is moved around and stacked on these big metal platforms. Sometimes as the rum comes in on the conveyor belt, they will fall off and smash on the ground. This started to happen about 90 minutes after Day took that selfie in the bathroom. The palletizer operator, after seeing the broken glass, called out over the radio that he needed a temp worker to come into that section of the factory and help him. Day's supervisor at the bottling line told Day to stop what he was doing and go over and help pick up the glass. There is a security camera video of Day running into the section of the factory where all the palletizers are, making himself obviously available to help pick up this glass. And the operator sees him and immediately turns, he's up on the catwalk, and he points down towards the first floor, clearly telling Day, you need to get down there, that's where the glass is, go sweep it up. Day immediately walks around and goes down to the first floor of this machine and begins working. A couple of minutes later, Day comes back up to the catwalk and he looks visibly confused. He's scratching his head, and just everything about his body language says something is wrong. Now, we don't know for sure what Day says next because there's no audio in this video, but he's clearly asking a question to the operator and also to a supervisor who's now in frame. And it looks very much like he's asking clarifying questions. Like he's confirming, you want me to go down there, right into that space down there and clean the glass up? That's what you want me to do? And clearly the operator and the supervisor have no time for questions from Day. They just want him to get this done. And so there's kind of a tense interaction between the two parties before Day ultimately just decides, okay, I'll just go down and do what they asked me to do. And so Day again goes back around and you see him go down into the first floor to continue cleaning this glass. And after a few moments, the supervisor and the operator, who don't realize Day is still down there, they turn the machine back on. And after a couple of seconds, they hear a scream coming from the first floor. They look over the railing down there and they see Day. The broken glass that needed to be cleaned up was located directly underneath this metal platform that lowered the built pallets that weighed 2,000 pounds all the way down to the floor before they were shipped off and out the door. In order for Day to actually get down in there and clean this glass up, he needed to crouch way down and practically crawl on his stomach to get into this tight space. While he was in there, the machine turned back on again, and he wasn't able to crawl out fast enough before this platform and 2,000 pounds of rum pressed him into the ground. It would be the equivalent of crawling on your stomach into the bottom of an elevator shaft and then having the elevator car come down and mechanically be lowered flush to the bottom with you in there. The palletizer operator and the other supervisor immediately spring into action and try to reverse this platform up off of Day, but they can't do it. And so they grabbed a metal pry bar and they tried to pry the platform off of him, but that didn't work either. And so finally, when emergency crews did show up and were able to get this platform up off of Day, it was too late. He was already dead. In any factory where a worker needs to go inside of a machine that could maim or kill them if it turned on, they go through what's called a lockout or tagout procedure before stepping foot inside. All it is they completely incapacitate that machine. Day had no idea about lockout tagout procedures because the only training he got was a 15-minute video that didn't touch on them. And so although Day definitely had reservations about going down underneath this machine, he wanted to make a good first impression on his first day of work at his first job ever. And so he pushed his reservations aside and went down below, believing the supervisor and the operator were looking out for him. When in reality, they, like all of the other managers and supervisors inside of this warehouse, had been trained to prioritize productivity over safety. And so while they definitely knew the lockout tagout procedures, they chose not to do them because that slowed down productivity. And so in this unfortunate example where Day is kind of like a second-class citizen within the Bacardi plant because he's a temp worker, his safety was thrown out the window in favor of reaching a quota, and it got him killed. Bacardi was ultimately fined $192,000, but after they improved their safety compliance, their fine was reduced to $110,000. Bacardi also paid Day Davis's family $250,000. The staffing agency that employed Davis was not hit with any fines, and to this day, they are still sending temp workers to the Bacardi bottling factory. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it. So give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please offer to do the like button's laundry, but only dry their clothes about 80% of the way. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3 or 4 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallin416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is Mr. Ballin. I also have a second YouTube channel called Mr. Ballin Shorts where I post random short videos and lost episodes. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballin. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's gonna do it. See ya. Today, we're going to look at 3 places you can't go and people who went there anyways. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, politely ask the like button to give you a ride home, but instead of sitting in the front seat, sit directly behind them, and then proceed to violently kick the back of their seat the entire ride, periodically asking if you're there yet. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. On May 23rd, 2011, a 26-year-old woman named Jamie Miner was working at a fancy restaurant in Austin, Texas. That night, something seemed to come over Jamie, and she began acting erratic, according to her coworkers. So erratic, in fact, that her boss told her she had to go home. And so some of Jamie's coworkers decided they would call one of her friends to come pick her up because they were concerned Jamie could not get home under her own power. But it would later turn out that when that friend showed up at the restaurant to get Jamie, Jamie wasn't there. And so the friend tried calling Jamie and looking for Jamie, but she was nowhere to be found. When the next day Jamie had still not come home, Jamie's friends and family began calling around and asking if anybody knew where she was, but no one seemed to know. And so the parents filed a missing person report and then began putting up flyers all over Austin in hopes that someone would recognize her and call in with some information. But over the next several weeks, after the police have launched their own search, no one came forward with any information about Jamie. Then on June 29th, so 37 days after Jamie has gone missing, a worker found some of Jamie's personal belongings inside of a parking garage about a half-mile away from Jamie's restaurant. This discovery prompted police to pull the surveillance footage not only from the parking garage, but from neighboring businesses. And what they saw on all of this footage was on the night Jamie was supposed to be getting picked up by her friend, she instead shows up on camera trying to get in the side door of a steakhouse located right next to that parking garage. The steakhouse was called Perry's, and Jamie used to work there. So Jamie tries the side door, it doesn't work, so she makes her way into the parking garage and tries a door on the back of the restaurant, but that also doesn't work. Then, for reasons no one fully understands, Jamie made her way up to the 3rd floor of this parking garage where she managed to pull off the cover to this huge air duct and then climbed inside. This air duct did eventually connect down to the steakhouse Perry's on the 1st floor, but in order to get down there, you would need to navigate these very tight and steep sections of pipe, and the inside of this air duct gets to be over 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The security footage only showed Jamie climbing into the duct. They didn't have footage of her leaving the duct. So the police made their way over to Perry's and this parking garage, and they get inside the air duct and they find Jamie. She had managed to climb through the ducts from the 3rd floor all the way down to the section of duct that was between the 1st floor and the 2nd floor. There, she had tried to go down this very steep section of pipe, and after getting to the bottom of it, she could not make the tight turn through the pipe. Her body just could not contort around the turn. But unfortunately, going back up it was impossible. It was too steep, it was too narrow, and there's nothing to grab onto. Jamie almost certainly began screaming for help, but the section of pipe she got stuck in was located in a building just off of the parking garage that was more or less abandoned, and so no one would have heard her. It's unclear how long Jamie was alive inside of that air duct, but eventually she died of hyperthermia, or overheating. While no one knows for sure why Jamie acted the way she did on the night she went missing, it was determined in her toxicology report that she had LSD in her liver. LSD is a very powerful hallucinogenic. During a busy 2009 weekend on a popular river in Florida, 2 boats collided. Within minutes, one of them, a 40-foot-long pleasure craft, had sank. Luckily, all the passengers on both boats survived, but unluckily, where the sunk boat finally landed underwater was not very deep, and it was just barely outside of a main shipping channel, which meant if it didn't get moved, someone was eventually going to run into it. The marina owner contacted a local commercial diver and asked him if he would come out and lift this boat up and move it. But that diver was not going to be available for several weeks, and he was asking for too much money. So the marina owner reached out to another local diver, a guy by the name of Tim, and offered him the job. Tim was not a commercial diver. He was a 43-year-old recreational diver who was well known in the area and had lots of diving experience. But in terms of experience lifting 40-foot crafts off the bottom of the river, Tim had no experience. But Tim was excited at this challenge being presented to him, and so he accepted the deal and offered to do it for half the money the commercial diver was asking for. Even though Tim had never raised a boat before, he knew it was going to require a lot of lift bags around the boat. Lift bags are like these big durable balloons that you can inflate and deflate underwater. But before Tim could just go down and start placing these bags, he needed to do a survey dive where he just went down and checked out the wreckage, saw it for himself, and figured out how many lift bags he would need and where he would place them. So on September 12th, Tim threw all of his dive gear into his truck, he left the marina and drove over to a parking lot that butted up against the shipping channel. Tim hopped out, leaving his gear in the truck. He walked down to the edge of the riverbank and he scanned out across the river looking for the buoy that the marina owner had told him was out there, designating where the shipwreck was. Once he found it and saw that it was not very far from where he was, he just walked back up to his truck, grabbed his gear, came back down to the water's edge. He jocked up, then hopped in the water and swam out to the buoy. Once he was there, he placed his diver down flag on the buoy. This is a flag that signifies to anybody in the area that there is a diver below them, and then he made his descent. Tim didn't expect to be underwater for very long, and because he was a very experienced diver, he probably thought this dive was going to be extremely routine. And so for those reasons, he had elected not to bring a dive partner with him. This is a huge no-no in the diving community, especially if you're going to be diving in a hazardous environment like a shipwreck. But Tim was confident, so he broke that rule. One of the pieces of gear that Tim had brought with him was a diver propulsion vehicle, or DPV for short. These DPVs come in all shapes and sizes, but what you should picture in your head is like a little torpedo with a propeller on the back, and the diver holds on to this torpedo and controls the speed using a throttle and basically just rockets around underwater. The current in the river that Tim was going to be in was fairly strong, and so Tim brought his DPV to help him stay near the shipwreck as he inspected it. After Tim went subsurface, he grabbed his scooter and began going straight down, and the water was not very clear, so he couldn't see the shipwreck at first. But after going down about 50 feet, he saw this beautiful boat. It was perched on its side on this fairly steep embankment with its nose pointing in the direction the current was flowing. Right away, Tim got to work swimming around the shipwreck, looking for different points on the boat where he could attach lift bags and marking those locations on his diver slate, which is like a dry erase board. But after going around the boat several times, Tim had not seen the actual impact site on the side of the boat that caused it to sink in the first place, and he wondered if it was hidden on the side of the boat that was laying in the sand. And so Tim decided he wanted to go down and have a look, and so he went down to where the sand met the boat, but as soon as he got down there, he kicked up all the mud and the sand and it killed his visibility. And so he grabbed onto the side of the boat and he picked up his DPV and turned it on with the propellers pointed back towards where the mud and the sand was, and he kind of used the propellers of the DPV like a leaf blower and blew the mud and sand out of his field of vision. And it worked great, but he couldn't see the impact site. And so he got underneath the boat and got closer and closer to where the actual metal of the boat was pressing up against the sand and just continued to blow away the mud and sand to get a better look, when all of a sudden the ship lurched forward and came to a stop on Tim's legs. He couldn't move, he was totally trapped. When Tim had used his DPV to clear away the mud and sand, he had also blown away some of the mud and sand that was keeping the boat from sliding farther down the embankment. And so when it got blown away, the boat became unsteady and it came to rest on top of Tim. When Tim was not able to pull his legs out from under this incredibly heavy boat, he most likely used the DPV to continue to erode the mud and sand around the boat to try to get it to continue to slide down off of his legs. But he wasn't able to do that because the boat was basically wedged up against his legs. Tim's legs were the thing keeping the boat from sliding any farther. And because Tim did not bring a dive partner, there was literally no one there to save him. And even though he had told the marina owner that he was going out to survey the wreck, he had not given his timeline, so no one was expecting him. And so he would have realized very quickly that there was virtually nothing he could do but wait to die. Several hours later, someone on the surface noticed Tim's diver down flag on that buoy and called in the authorities. When the fire department's dive team went down to the wreckage, they found Tim. He was still trapped underneath the boat. He had run out of air and he had drowned. From a young age, Carrie O'Connor had an intense love of learning. When she learned how to read, her parents had to bribe her to get her to put her book down so she would go outside and play with the other kids. While Carrie loved to learn about all things, her favorite subject was French culture. And so she began devouring all things French, and then in middle school she began studying the language, and by high school she was nearly fluent and taking college-level French courses. Carrie would go on to earn several degrees in French, including a PhD. And in 2019, she put that PhD to use when she was offered a full-time professorship at Boston University. She eagerly accepted the role. After her first full year at BU, she decided it was time to get an apartment that was closer to campus. So in August of 2020, shortly after Carrie's 38th birthday, she, along with her two beloved cats, moved just 10 minutes away from Boston University into an old apartment building on a busy street. With her apartment still filled with unopened moving boxes and furniture wrapped in plastic, Carrie broke out her laptop and enthusiastically wrote an email to all of her students for the year titled The Joy of Learning French. In it, her students saw her passion for the French language and how excited she was about the upcoming academic year. A few weeks later, on Monday, September 14th, Carrie was back at her apartment building after classes, and she had just purchased a brand new piece of furniture that she wanted to haul up to her apartment. This piece of furniture was not actually assembled. All the parts and the directions were inside of this box that was 7 feet tall, 1 foot wide, and weighed just under 80 pounds. And so Carrie got this huge box out of her car at street level and then hauled it all the way through the front doors of her apartment building into the first floor lobby, where she leaned it up against the wall and then pressed the call button for the elevator. To understand what happens next, you need to have a basic understanding of how Carrie's elevator worked. Once the elevator car arrived on your floor, you would slide open this big door called the hoistway door. And on the other side, you would see the elevator car, and on the car itself would be yet another door. This door is called the car gate. This metal accordion-style door would also be slid to the side manually, but unlike the hoistway door, the car gate had to be shut all the way in order for the elevator to move between floors. So when the light dinged in the first floor lobby above Carrie's head, she opened up the hoistway door, and then she reached inside and slid open the car gate, and then she grabbed her package and began trying to push it inside of the elevator car. The only way it looked like she could fit this huge package inside of the elevator was if she got it in there at an angle standing up. But no matter how hard she pushed and pulled on it, she just could not get it to go inside. And so while Carrie's doing this, another tenant happened to walk in the front doors of the apartment building, and they saw Carrie struggling, and at first he just walked past Carrie and started going up the stairs towards his own apartment, but he stopped and he turned, and he just said to Carrie, "Hey, I don't think it's a good idea to keep doing what you're doing. That package looks like it's too heavy to be on that elevator. The elevator's really old, and you might trip a sensor, and it might start moving before you're ready. You know, we've had problems with that elevator before. It's just not worth the risk." And so Carrie, who's already pretty committed to doing this, she hesitates for a second and just kind of looks at her package, and she looks up at the guy and says, "You know what, I'm just gonna try one more time to get it inside the elevator." And so Carrie goes back to trying to get it on, and this other tenant hesitates for a second and then decides, okay, I'll help her do it. And so he goes down and he holds open the hoistway door with his hand, and Carrie goes inside of the elevator car, and she uses her hip to keep open the car gate. And the two of them begin pushing and pulling, and finally they're able to wedge this package at an angle inside of the elevator car. And so Carrie thanks the guy, and he says no problem. He turns and walks up the stairs, and he disappears. Once he was gone, Carrie didn't press any of the floor buttons. Instead, she tried to close the car gate over the top of her package. But at the same time, a maintenance worker in the floor below her, which was the basement, hit the call button for the elevator. Unbeknownst to Carrie, the top of her huge package, when they wedged it inside, had pressed up against the sensor at the top of the door frame that registers when the car gate has shut. And so when the maintenance worker pressed the call button, because that package was pressing on the sensor, it tricked the elevator into thinking the gate was shut and secured, and now it was time to move. And so the car began to go down, but it only made it a couple of feet before the movement caused the package to slip off of the sensor, causing the elevator to stop. Carrie was most likely very confused how this car would have moved, considering the car gate was still wide open, but she had bigger problems. She was now trapped between the first floor lobby and the basement. But she didn't panic. Instead, she decided she would just get her package back inside the elevator car, and then she would figure out what to do next. The package, when it came off that sensor, had fallen forward and was basically jutting out of the elevator. So the top half of it was in the first floor lobby, propped up against the floor of the first floor lobby. And so Carrie turned around so her back was facing outside of the elevator, and she got down in a squatting position underneath her package, so her shoulder was up against the package, and then she began pressing it up as hard as she could until she managed to press the package back inside of the car. But again, the top of that package made contact with that sensor that registers whether that gate is shut, and so believing it was shut and secure, the elevator began moving down again. And this time, Carrie, whose back is to the opening of the elevator, she lost her balance and fell backwards out of the elevator into that narrow space between the outside of the elevator and the inside of the elevator shaft. Now, if the elevator had not been moving, she probably could have just crawled back up into the elevator, but unfortunately, her package this time did not slip off the sensor. And so the elevator still believed the gate was shut, and so it kept on moving down. And so as soon as Carrie fell into this narrow space, the movement of the elevator would have kind of sucked her up into that space, crushing her up against the inside of the elevator shaft wall as the car forces its way down past her towards the basement. But the car doesn't even get to the basement. It stops once Carrie is pinned perfectly between the elevator and the elevator shaft walls. When the fire department finally arrived, it was too late. Carrie was already deceased. So that's gonna do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we will pin you at the top of the comments section. If you got something out of today's video and you haven't done this already, please politely ask the like button to give you a ride home. And when they say yes, instead of sitting in the front seat, sit directly behind them and then proceed to violently kick the back of their seat the whole ride, periodically asking if you're there yet. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3 or 4 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallin416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is Mr. Ballin. I also have a second YouTube channel called Mr. Ballin Shorts, where I post random short videos and lost episodes. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballin. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's gonna do it. See ya.
It was a tragedy. With knockoff batteries, Little Miss Cupcake never stood a chance. Until Energizer Ultimate Lithium. The #1 longest lasting AA battery. Case closed.
Today, we're going to look at 3 places you can't go and people who went there anyways. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please replace the like button's hairspray with Gorilla Glue adhesive spray. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. On February 24th, 2019, a woman arrived at a ceramics factory in Hubei province in China. She walked through the front door into the main office where she saw a desk attendant. She informed them she was a quality control inspector and she was there that day to inspect their vehicles. The attendant was accustomed to their company being periodically inspected, and so she asked the woman if she needed any help, and the woman said, "Nope, I'm just gonna roam around your building, check what I need to check, and then I'll be out of here." And so the attendant told her that was totally fine, and if she needed anything, just come back and she would help her. And so the inspector thanked her and then turned around and went out the front door and checked the vehicles in the front lot of the ceramics factory. And then after she was done, she went back into the main office. She walked past the attendant and out the back door into the very active yard where all day long these huge bulldozers would move around thousands of pounds of sand. And so the inspector walked out that back door and she scanned the yard and she saw there were 2 bulldozers doing just that, moving all around. And then off to the left side, there was a dump truck that seemed to be stationary. And so very confidently, she just walked right into the yard and made her way over to that dump truck. And then when she got there, she flagged the driver down and said she was an inspector and that she was going to check the vehicle out. And so the driver helped her by turning on and off signals and moving back and forth. And then at some point, the inspector needed the dump truck driver to back up a significant distance. She needed to watch him do that. And so she, the inspector, backed away from the dump truck until she was in the middle of the yard, standing right in front of this parked bulldozer. What happens next is all caught on video. And so as she's standing there and she's watching the dump truck back up right in front of her, the bulldozer driver right behind her turns on the machine and immediately lurches forward. Now, the driver of this bulldozer did not see the woman, and she was in his blind spot right in front of the bucket of his bulldozer. And he was not aware there was somebody on foot walking around the yard. It's an extremely dangerous place to be on foot. And so he goes right into her and he knocks her backwards. She falls into the bucket. She starts screaming, but no one can hear her. It's so loud. And the driver drives the bucket directly into a pile of sand and scoops up thousands of pounds of sand that come down directly on this woman. So now she's completely buried alive and being crushed by all this sand. And then the driver, completely oblivious, lifts the bucket up, turns around and drives across the yard and dumps the sand and the woman into a vibrating sand crusher. The vibrating sand crusher is exactly what it sounds like. It pulverizes bits of rock and stone and grinds them down into a very fine powder. The machines come in various shapes and sizes, but this one inside of this ceramics factory was a top-loaded version, and it basically looked like a big dumpster with this big opening at the top. And so these bulldozer drivers would take these clumps of sand and they would dump it in this opening at the top of this bin. And then once they dumped their sand into the opening, the machine would vibrate, causing the sand to filter its way down towards the bottom of the machine, where there were these big, vicious metal claws that constantly smashed together and would just completely obliterate anything that passed through them. In the video, when the driver dumps his bucket load into the sand crusher, you can actually see the woman falling in, but then she immediately jumps into action and begins trying to pull herself up and out of this pile. And at some point, she gets most of her upper body out, and she waves, and she gets the attention of the driver who's just dumped her into the sand crusher. And the driver, he stops right away. You can see the vehicle lurch to a stop. He leaps out and he starts running over to the sand crusher. But as he's running over, this woman who's waving and waving, at some point her leg or some other part of her gets grabbed by those jaws at the bottom of the machine, and she's pulled slowly down into the sand crusher and disappears under the sand. When this happens, the driver is frantic and he's screaming for other people in the factory to come over and help. And at some point, the others inside, they realize there's an emergency and they all run over. But when they realize what's happened, that someone has fallen into the sand crusher, they all just stop and stand there because they know there's nothing they can do. The woman was gone. In June of 2015, 45-year-old James Young landed his dream job. For the last several years, James had been a 5th grade teacher in East Canton, Ohio, teaching special education. And while he loved his job and he loved the kids he worked with, he had always had his eye on becoming a guidance counselor for high school students. In 1988, James had actually graduated from East Canton, Ohio High School, and ever since his graduation, he had wanted to come back to the school and help the next generation of East Canton students prepare for their lives as adults. And a guidance counselor was designed to do just that. James had applied for the job before, but every time he applied, they would tell him that while he was qualified, there just wasn't a spot open for him. However, at the end of that school year, he was told a guidance counselor spot had opened up at the high school and the job was his if he wanted it. And so, of course, James said, yes, I'll take the job. And immediately he told his mother about this amazing news. And his mother, who lived only a block away from him in East Canton, Ohio, would say that her son was so ecstatic about the job that normally when summer break was coming up, he would really look forward to that time off from school. But now that he had this new job to look forward to, he was already anxious for the summer to be over. James was a single man, but he was not lonely. He had a number of very close, lifelong friends that he would spend virtually all of his off time with. And that summer, he did just that. He went out with his friends, they explored all of Ohio and outside surrounding areas. They spent a lot of time outside and they enjoyed each other's company. Towards the end of the summer, James and his friends knew it was time to schedule their annual